started here tonight. Good evening and welcome to another Grange Month Zoom. Tonight, we have a really special presentation. I will let you know now that the goal is for it to be interactive. So if at any point you have questions tonight for our guests, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I will be serving as your moderator tonight. For anybody who doesn't know me by now, my name is Vonada. I am the National Grange Communications Director. This is the last of our Zooms for this week. Next week, we will be back on Wednesday night with Grange Month Trivia Zoom, which is both Grange related and non-Grange related. We'll be in teams of 4. Please tune in. It'll be a ton of fun. Even if you don't have a team, we'll put you on a team and you could win some awesome prizes. And then next Friday, we will wrap up Grange Month with an e-member forum with Amanda Brzana Rios, our Membership and Leadership Development Director. Tonight is our legislative roundtable, and we are joined by National Grange Legislative Director Burton Eller and Legislative Assistant Sean O'Neill, who I'm going to spotlight both of them here so that they can be side by side for you guys. And tonight we are, I'm going to turn it over to them here in just a second, but if you guys have any questions about Grange policy, how the Grange is advocating for you in Washington, D.C., issues that we are or are not focusing on and why we should or should not be focusing on them, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Like I said, I'll be moderating, so I'll jump in here in a little bit and kind of keep us on track. So Burton, I'm first going to turn it over to you. If you want to give us a quick background on what it is and how the Grange advocates in DC for us.
Thank you, Phil. Sean and I are going to tag team tonight, and we're not going to talk extremely long because the Grangers out there may have something they want to say or ask or make a statement about. I think everyone on the Zoom tonight understands our policy process, that it is a grassroots process. We are a grassroots organization. Policy is passed at the local and Pomona and then to the state Grange. If it clears the state Grange, it comes to the National Grange. The delegates then debate our policy, and when it passes the delegate body, it's Grange policy. And we've got a lot of policy, don't we, Sean? We've got a policy book. It's about a half an inch thick, and it's full of policy, like most state Grange books are at the state level. And I want to just reiterate that the stance we take and the policies we take it on basically are based on that policy book that we revise every year with the new policies that come in. Some policies are old and the committees take those out. They either not passed or over a lot of years are passed or they're no longer relevant. And so when we do writing letters, we co-sign letters, and we visit with congressmen and senators, when we take a stance with an agency, it's based on Grange policy. And that makes it a little easier for Sean and I because, we can say, hey, it's not whether I agree with it or not, it's the Granger policy, and that's what we're going to try to ram through here. Just a quick overview on several of the things that we're working on at the 50,000 foot level. I'd like to start with some, and everyone understands right now, I think, that we're in a bind in the country right now from many, many directions. It's planting time, and fertilizer is hard to get. When you get it, it's very high. Pesticides will be the same way. The seeds are the same way. So, corn going to $7 or $8 a bushel, now that sounds good until you put the pencil to what it takes to grow that bushel of corn in this coming growing season, 2022, and the profit margin doesn't look very good. So the big issue, of course, in Washington, in the ag and food arena right now is food insecurity. Will we have enough food? How are we going to feed the world? And what are the crops going to look like? And the trade around the world is shifting so much with Russia and Ukraine and other parts of Europe, either not exporting or shifting their exports or not able to get them out or what. So we have a big issue with getting raw food to market. And then we have a problem with getting that food to the processor and the processor to the consumer. We're working in the Ag Transportation Coalition with the Safety Transportation Board, and they're going to give us the opportunity to have younger apprentices drive some trucks, particularly shorter distances. We're caught flat-footed with so much in the food chain, the supply chain. You see where we're paying $4 and $5 for gas. I talked to the farm this morning, and we're trying to figure out how much diesel we're going to spend on what. You're right. When you start rationing diesel at $5 plus, and that's off-road farm diesel. So that's a major issue, as is a lot of things in our country right now. Inflation is eating us alive, and the grassroots consumer is beginning to ask why really, really strongly, and that'll turn into one of the political, if not the political, issues for the summer, leading into the 22 elections. And I'll ask Sean to give you a little overview after a few minutes about the political climate, the political outlook in Washington, nonpartisan, but kind of what the politics look like. We in the Grange office will be spending probably 50% of our time, if not more, on healthcare issues this year. Coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of folks that haven't had good health care for the last 2 years, and we need some policies changed. I think we found through the pandemic that we can do some things faster and better than we thought we could, and the wheels of government are very slow to turn, but we're trying to cut through that, particularly at the agency level. We don't have to wait on Congress to pass something. A whole lot of the things we need done are at the agency level. Health and Human Services can make those, and we'll be spending a lot of time with healthcare issues. We had a big win before the first year. It went into effect the first year, and that was the no surprises billing, where you go in and to a doctor, and maybe the anesthesiologist is out of network and you didn't know it, and you got a great big bill beyond your insurance, and that was a surprise. Can't do that any longer. As of January 1, that's up to the doctor and the hospital and the insurance company to resolve, not the patient. We've been working on that for a couple of years, and I had no idea that it would pass this quickly. But again, the pandemic brings a lot of issues to light. Another big issue that we are sharing about, that's been on the Grange priority list for 10 more, probably more years, a lot longer than I've been here, and that is postage reform. The bills went through in March. The president signed them a couple weeks ago, and signed the bill a couple weeks ago, and we have postal reform on the books now. We have Saturday delivery, we have package delivery, and we have post offices operating in the country on a regular schedule. Now, Betsy and I were invited to meet with Postmaster General DeJoy, and he wanted to tell us what he was going to do to make it efficient and effective and clean up the finances. And boy, we wish him luck and offer to him all the help we can, because that would be fantastic. So we must have a postal system for rural America. I'm going to wind down there and turn it over to Sean and ask him to give you just a little snapshot maybe of what the political summer and legislative arena looks like, because once we go out on August recess, when they come back, very little legislation is going to get done. It's going to be all about re-election. And when Sean gets finished with that, I'll ask him to give you a quick update on broadband and a couple other issues.
Yeah, so to start on just sort of the lay of the land here in Washington, sort of first on policy-wise, what's happening. To be honest, there's not much that looks like it's moving anytime soon. Congress was able to pass last year's budget earlier in March, which doesn't sound like it's last year's budget if it was passed in March of this year, but that's the way these things go. They kick the can down the road. So really, there's not a ton left on the table right now. There's a few small odds and ends here and there, bills that need cleaning up, some of which are quite important to our interests, like the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which we've supported, which would compensate farmers for voluntary climate conservation sort of activity on their farm, voluntary and compensated, and things like ocean shipping reform. But they're mostly small things, nothing too big going on. The one thought is maybe over the summer you could see Democrats in the House and Senate try to revive some of their policy proposals, which died this past fall and winter in the Build Back Better Act. Those include lots of things like spending significant sums on climate infrastructure, spending significant sums on various social welfare programs, significant sums on various healthcare programs, as well as some tax increases that go along with it, which have been brought up again in President Biden's proposed budget for this year, which include changes that the Grange opposes, such as changes to step-up basis, and capital gains taxes and estate taxes, which could impact family farmers. So we're always engaged on those sorts of issues and looking to uh, cut them off before they even become issues, really, before they get to the floor of Congress or anything like that. And to be clear, those are just proposals in the president's budget, which is not even a law being proposed, really more of a suggestion to Congress, which very often looks nothing like the final budget that's passed. But those are sort of the major things that could happen this summer, although we'll see. It seems like there's not a ton of momentum for any of that right now, particularly considering the more long-term view of things beyond this summer is that in polling and then following historical trends, Republicans seem likely to have a good shot at taking back control of the House of Representatives as well as the Senate. That goes back to first midterm election since the 80s. It's been historically that the party out of power has taken back those chambers, and it particularly seems likely with how polls and things are going in the country right now, which means that behind the scenes of current policymaking, there's a lot of sort of shadow fights going on to see what the Republican agenda might look like if they were to take back the House and Senate, which the Grange isn't involved in those necessarily, but we're certainly monitoring them and aware of all the conversations going on behind closed doors. We'll hear just next week from ranking member of the House Agriculture Committee, G.T. Thompson, about what he thinks he might do if the Republicans take back the House and he has the chance to chair the Agriculture Committee. So that's sort of the lay of the land right now in Washington through the summer and then into the fall. We'll see if Democrats can get their priorities back up and going this summer, but it doesn't seem super likely, and we'll see what Republicans have planned following that. As Burton mentioned, a big issue that, sort of prior to everything slowing down here in Washington this spring and through the summer, that came through for the National Grange is broadband. The National Grange, similar to Postal Service, has had broadband as a major primary issue that it's been working on as long as it's been an issue. Like rural electrification before it, we've been fighting to ensure that rural America gets a fair shake, just like suburban and urban Americans get, with connectivity to broadband and the internet, which is essential, as has been shown by this Zoom call and everything else we've done in this pandemic, to just operating in a normal way in our society. And the big win for that was that in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which the Grange supported and saw overwhelming support from both parties in the Senate and the House, which President Biden signed last year, was included significant funding for broadband expansion in unserved parts of America, which is mostly rural when it comes to broadband. Specifically, we're most excited about a $45 billion fund, which is being distributed by the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, to the states to build broadband. And this is where Grangers like you, who live in our grassroots communities and are active in legislative affairs in your state, can really take some action, because the way this is going to work is that $45 billion is going to be distributed by the federal government through NTIA to state governments. And then the state governments have the final duty through whatever broadband agency or authority or department they set up to actually give that money to projects on the ground and build broadband. So it's going to be super important for states to set up their programs and their authorities such that broadband money is actually spent in an efficient and effective manner, and they get folks connected out in the countryside. Some states will do better than others, and we've seen from programs over the past few decades that sometimes if a broadband program isn't structured correctly, you can waste a lot of money and not connect many people. That means that a good program will prioritize unserved folks first, so you don't have overbuilding in places where there already is broadband. A good program will be technology neutral, so you don't end up funneling a bunch of money into one type of technology, say fiber, which is super expensive and doesn't work in every situation, and should really focus on using efficiency and working with already established industries and groups and communities to build as much as possible, working with rural electric cooperatives, things like that, to ensure as much is built as possible. If you have any questions about that, we'd definitely love to talk to you about it, because like I said, the National Grange here, we've done a lot. to ensure that the money gets out there. And we're going to keep working to make sure NTIA gives the money in an effective and efficient way. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's down to states to get it right. And that means that state grangers and folks out in the state are going to have to do the hard work of making sure that gets done right. Because let's just say, folks out in Oregon, I see we have some people from Oregon or Maine or wherever, aren't going to exactly want to hear from us here in Washington. They'll want to hear from you actually living in the state on the ground. So that wraps up, I guess, what me and Burton have to say to start, sort of our lay of the land and big issues we've been working on here. If there's any questions or things like that, we're happy to chat.
I might just add, according to Betsy Huber, the Grange has had broadband deployment to rural America as a top priority for 2 decades. And, it's like, wow, could this ever come to fruition? And again, this is one more product that was spurred tremendously by the lockdown and by the COVID pandemic. I don't think Washington certainly didn't. And I think a whole lot of state capitals didn't understand that America is not connected. And particularly if you're in rural America, you're really, really not connected. And so basically there's, in addition to the 45 billion that Sean's talking about, there's some money that was coming forward before Congress acted on an infrastructure bill. So we have a total of about $100 billion to rewire America. And we worked with some rural state senators to make sure that the act actually said we will take out of that pot the funding and the direction necessary to reach the unserved first and the underserved next. The underserved is anybody that doesn't get a 25/3, 25 down, 3 megabits up. And so, if you're not that fast, it's hard to do things today. It's hard to do homework on less than 25/3. So if you don't have 25/3, you should be served first. And we have a couple of very important committee ranking members and chairmen like Senator Wicker of Mississippi, that is his big issue. As you can imagine in Mississippi, you've got to get the unserved served first. So it's a great honor to have at least partially accomplished a 20-year-old priority for the Grange. And again, it's exciting to have a few wins to talk about.
Great. At this point, if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in or drop them in the chat. Like I said earlier, I do want to kind of ask Sean or Burton quickly, thinking ahead, 2023 is the next farm bill coming out already. What do we think, any priorities in there that the Grange is going to be pushing for in the next farm bill?
Sean's been attending some of the early hearings. The Senate Ag Committee opened up state hearings in Chairwoman Stabenow's home state of Michigan this week. That'll be first of next week. And so it hadn't happened yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. And Sean, what are you picking up from the early hearings from the other ag community and rural community that their needs in 2023?
Well, the general consensus, it seemed so far, at least, in the hearings that the House has gotten off to, they've had a bunch more. The Senate hasn't had a hearing quite yet, but like Bert mentioned, it's coming. Is that commodity groups and, farm groups are generally happy with the core programs of the Farm Bill, things like crop insurance, the commodity titles, a lot of things, research titles, things like that. There's always small areas where groups would prefer maybe, their price here or there is more favorable to them, but in general, they're happy with the main framework that exists. The two big areas of controversy so far, and it seems like these will be the areas that lead to the most friction in writing the Farm Bill, are first, climate spending. Democrats have expressed an interest in changing some of the titles, the energy title, the conservation title, to do more to do specifically with climate change and climate related programs, as well as rural development. Republicans have said sometimes, yes, those programs, okay, that's okay. We think sometimes that's good, things like voluntary programs and incentive-based programs. But in general, even when they support programs, they've made it clear that they don't want it in the Farm Bill. They think the Farm Bill ought to be focused on its, classic ag issues, classic rural development issues that it's been focused on for decades. and those two issues should be separated and done independently. That's certainly going to be an area of contention, with particularly in the conservation and energy titles and rural development. Democrats fighting to get as much in as they can, Republicans fighting to keep it as much as it has been as they can. And the second area that'll probably be contentious is, and this is often contentious, is the nutrition title. That's where things like supplementary nutrition assistance program, SNAP, gets its funding from, which is the largest individual funding pool in the Farm Bill. Democrats will likely be pushing to increase nutrition spending significantly, which again runs into a similar situation where Republicans aren't necessarily opposed to increasing the nutrition spending, but at the expense of what? What else in the bill maybe will need to be tweaked or changed or shortened up to increase nutrition spending? Or if you're going to increase nutrition spending, how do you change maybe perhaps the means testing to take some out at the top end? Or how will we fund, reallocate from other spending priorities to fund more nutrition spending, things like that. There's likely to be some increase, obviously, because inflation has made food cost more for people. So it's not going to be, a flat change, but that's likely to be another big area of contention. And then, like I said, as always, there's small tweaks to all the various more niche research, commodity sort of titles that always have a lot of heat going on smaller levels. But it seems generally like it's going to be another tough Farm Bill fight as always, but the core of it will likely remain pretty unchanged. That's my assessment so far.
Farm Bill is, and the two ag committees are one of the last bastions of bipartisanship on a regular basis. That's been tested a little bit on the House side this year. And we'll see how that lasts through the Farm Bill next year. But the ag committees have traditionally worked together. They could disagree, but they weren't disagreeable, and it didn't bring it in public. And so they were able to work out a Farm Bill in a very orderly manner. The Senate ranking members on the Republican side and the chairwoman on the Democratic side seem to be working together quite well and resolving their differences in private. The House is attempting to do that, but it's not quite as easy. So we'll see if the Ag Committee can continue its bipartisanship, gentlemanly approach to a Farm Bill next year. We need that.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, it's going to obviously depend on who's in charge of the committees when the bill's being written in 2023. And it seems likely that, at least in the House and potentially in the Senate as well, Republicans could take control, which with the Democratic president would lead to obviously a lot more compromise having to come in the Farm Bill than maybe if it was to be written this year. So we'll see exactly how that works out elections-wise, but something worth noting when thinking about how hearings now are reflected when the Farm Bill is actually being written a year from now.
Great. So Steve from Turkey Hill Grange in Illinois asked, is there a source for information on how much would have gone? So this is out of, I believe, the 100 billion that you were talking about, Burton, would have gone to the states, and if the states have indicated how they're going to use that money.
That's a great question.
So I know for the $45 billion pot from NTIA, which is the biggest sort of individual pot that the states are specifically administering. NTIA, before the bill was signed into law, had a staff of about 12 people. Now NTIA is hiring for every single state in the country a single specific person to administer the broadband grants for that state, as well as a ton of other staff to administer the overall program. NTIA basically had its budget, massively increased, and so along with it, its personnel. So they're still standing up the program itself to distribute the funds, but it's looking like maybe the summer and fall of this year is when they'll actually get to giving money out to the states. So states will submit a plan that they write, the state, saying, we think of the money that's been allocated, we deserve this amount, and this is what we plan to do with it. And then NTIA, which will have set up a system, which they're currently doing now, will look at those plans, evaluate them, and determine how much money gets actually distributed to the state, depending on, how many unserved people they have in the state, what the state, plans to do with the projects and things like that. And then once all the money is distributed, so it hasn't been distributed yet, but it will be probably this summer and this fall, then it's up to the state to take that money and put out, proposals for a request for proposal for, grant requests and things like that for whatever entities are going to end up actually putting the money to use and building out wire in the ground. For Illinois, I did some quick Googling there while we were talking. It seems like Illinois has a program under the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, which is where their broadband expansion programs have been located historically, which I imagine is where they'll land again. I'll paste a link to that in the chat. But yeah, this is where folks, like I said, right now, your state is probably writing its plan to ask the federal government for this money and how it's going to implement the money and actually spend it. So if you, on behalf of your state Grange or folks in your local Grange, can find a way to write letters, call, whatever, contact, get a meeting with whatever your state agency is that's going to be handling this money, and let them know, we think it's important that, it goes to the unserved, it's tech neutral, things like that, so we get as much built as possible. Now's the time to do that. And we'd be more than happy to help find individual state resources and connect you to people in your state if other people have it as well, have questions specifically about their state as well.
Some states actually had a broadband office before the 45 billion is being allotted, but others are having to scramble. They may have had it in several agencies, and now they probably need to consolidate. Other states had no broadband specific authority to any one location, and basically, in order to get this money, they're going to have a central location. And we're encouraging our state Grange presidents to, as soon as that's available and as soon as it's organized, find out where that office is, who's in charge of it, and arrange a briefing or a meeting, or at least a way to get updated from that state broadband office, because that's part of the accountability. We filed with the NTIA it's been a couple months ago, some criteria and some suggestions for follow-up to be sure that it's effective, efficient, and it's going to where it's supposed to go. That is unserved first, underserved second, and then everybody else third. So the state agency that's in charge of broadband deployment and dispensing those funds will, by this time next year, will be ultra important for the state Grange to have a close relationship and a contact there.
And this is where local Granges and state Granges have a lot of credibility. I mean, the Grange isn't asking for this money to be given to us. We're asking for as much broadband to be built and as many people to be connected as possible. Whereas a lot of the other folks who will probably be approaching these state offices are maybe fiber companies who are going to be saying, oh, you have to build just fiber because that's the modern connection we want to future proof. And they've got a financial interest in it all being fiber so they can get as many contracts as they can. Or there'll be telecoms or rural electric companies, whatever, cities that are going to be fighting to get their chunk of the change so that they can build their specific projects and make as much money as possible. Whereas the Grange can say, look, we're just, we're not seeing any of this money. We're just folks who want to get connected and get people in rural America online. And we think it ought to be done this way. So you have a real good story to tell.
And one thing that's worked well for the Grange in the past, and I'm sure that between Sean, Burton, and myself, we'd be happy to help with again, is getting form letters for your Grange members to be able to send in, or some sort of form letter tailored to you and your Grange and your community to be able to send into those agencies once they're up and running. So feel free to reach out to the three of us. I'll probably send you over to them, and then they'll send you back to me once we have the language worked out. But this is a great way for you to use your national staff to help you at the local level, or to use your state staff if you have a state legislative director to kind of help you get the Grange's word out to the higher agencies. Okay, so we had a question from somebody named Betsy Huber. I believe she's the national president. She's very important. She asked, can you talk about industrial solar farms versus prime farmland? It's becoming a big issue, at least in the Northeast. Just gonna hot potato.
Yes, a loaded question, doesn't she? Betsy, I presume industrial farms you're talking about, 500,000 cow dairy versus a family farm. What would be your question? I mean, Sean, can you clarify that just a little bit?
She means solar like plants versus
Oh,
farms.
solar farms,
Lar- large scale solar,
large scale solar,
industrial,
except in
utility.
some
Well,
very
I
rural
know
areas.
for
Except
I,
for
I,
some very rural areas, that is becoming quite a controversy.
I know from our policy, we just sort of have a general, we support all of the above energy, whatever, whether it be natural gas or solar or whatever. If private actors want to do private things with their private land, they can do what they please. That's our general policy as regards the issue. I
And
mean,
those are
we'd
local.
certainly be happy. We'd certainly be happy to hear from folks in our states if they have any resolutions on what the National Grange ought to be advocating on this, though.
To save us a little bit, Betsy, as far as the Grange policy is concerned, that's a basic local ordinance control situation. So the county government would be in most places would be the one that would have the permits and issue the permits. And I think that's the way it should be. The local folks ought to be able to control what comes in there. So I'm not sure I can answer your question, Betsy, other than that's a local ordinance permitting issue right now. The small farms and in rural areas and seeding I know in at least New York State and some others, the urban area is beginning to weigh in on that because they want cheap electricity, but they don't want to ride through the country and see solar panels on the farms that they're used to seeing out there. And that's an issue that probably will continue to need to be controlled locally.
Some states, the state has to sign off on those large scale. I think New York is one of them where the Public Utility Commission or somebody at the state level has to okay it in coordination with the local zoning. So it's something that we need to have policy on, I think, so people out there can write resolutions for their state sessions and national this year.
There we go. I know we had one in Pennsylvania last year. I don't know where it went, but I think it was a Pennsylvania specific one that didn't get passed up. Great. Any other questions from the crowd? In the meantime, while we wait for questions to roll in, Burton and Sean, what would you say the greatest asset the local Grange has on helping advance policy in their hometowns?
Well, before I let Sean, he can talk for 30 minutes on that because he's prepared a presentation for meetings like we're having for fly-in. And while I'm on the podium here, let's just encourage everyone to, if you haven't already, sign up on our Zoom for the fly-in Monday, Tuesday of next week. Basically, Monday is the day you want to be on, as early as 9 o'clock. Starting at 11 o'clock, we have quite a lineup of speakers, including the rural office guy from the White House is going to walk up to the Grange and be with us and present from the Grange. We've got virtual presentations by Chairwoman Stabenow, Senate Ag Committee, Ranking Member G.T. Thompson from the House Ag Committee. We've got the lady that runs one of the most important healthcare coalitions in Washington, a young gentleman that worked for the telecom industry for a number of years, and now he's been hired by a fiber firm to help get their wiring out through the country. But he's also been able to see the 360 degrees of what we're talking about broadband deployment. So he will be on, and the infrastructure, a whole package that we just saw passed 4 months ago or whatever. The group that led that coalition called Rebuild Rural, the young lady will be here to tell us the intricacies of that and what that means to rural America. And then wrapping up, because we don't want to cut off conversation with this gentleman, is the founder of Rural Minds, who has some personal family experience with suicides at the farm and rural level. And he said enough. he wants to do something about it. And he's formed the Rural Minds organization to partner with rural individuals in rural America. And he wants to give us an overview of what we can do as local Granges. So get back to the question, the most important thing that local Grange that we have and local Grangers and local Grangers have is grassroots. You are grassroots. We are grassroots. A lot of industries, a lot of organizations in this country would love to have a grassroots network. That's not too easy. We work with a lot of healthcare foundations and organizations like the lupus, the kidney, et cetera, great folks. They are not grassroots. They've got folks that are interested in that one thing, but again, they're everywhere, in cities and local areas, but they are not community-based like the Grange. And so they can talk about lupus or they can talk about kidney on single issues. The Grange can talk about rural America. You know, one of my favorite stump speeches is that a whole lot of people like to talk about, these days anyway, like to talk about rural America. Others like to talk for rural America, and yet others like to talk into rural America. But the Grange is rural America. And so I think that's, Sean, and let me turn it over to you for a second, but that's the strongest thing that we have policy-wise in the Grange, is that we are a Grange that is a grassroots, rural and small town resident organization with an interest in communities and two major things: community service and public policy. And with those grassroots members out there, like I say, it's not too hard to find several that can be in a member's district that we can get a hold of very quickly. So I definitely think the strongest thing policy-wise for the Grange is our grassroots membership.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Burton. I mean, there's only a few ways to really have power when you're advocating for things, at least here in Washington. And either one, which is more famously talked about, is money. You know, either you have a lot of people you employ in a certain district, or you make significant campaign donations or whatever, or you have people. And that's what the Grange has. The Grange has folks, the real people, you know, folks out in the country who actually, you know, go out and talk to their members of Congress and our voters and constituents, you know, real folks living their lives. That's what the Grange has that gives us power here in Washington. Nobody would listen to Burton or I, because we certainly aren't making big campaign donations, if it weren't for our 150,000 members across the country. That's the first thing I lead off with. Just about any letter I write to a member of Congress is the National Grange is 150,000 rural Americans who care about issues and have come together to say, you know, this is what we believe ought to be done in the country. If you want to know exactly how I best think you should use those members you have in your local Granges, I can, like Burton said, have a whole presentation on it. I can talk at length, but that's sort of the fundamentals of what gives us power here in Washington is you guys. So that means, you know, when you have something in your local community that you care about, get folks together and, you know, ask to meet with your representative or host a town hall or, you know, organize a letter writing campaign or try to visit your representatives in their offices in their district. And then also, we'd like it a lot, since this is the National Grange talking to you all, if you let us know when you do that, because we can help, you know, help you organize and coordinate and figure out who you need to meet with. And we can amplify the power of what you're saying by taking your message even farther and talking to the national staff that these folks have and sort of giving them a 1-2 punch at the local and national level. But that's sort of my big plea is get active in your communities, and then don't just do it on your own. Tell us about it so we can work with you and help make it as powerful and effective as we can.
And the Grange is non-political, non-partisan, but they're community-based and they believe in citizenship, and there is absolutely nothing wrong. In fact, we want to encourage you to invite members of Congress, your county supervisors, and other elected officials to your Grange meeting, to your Grange Hall. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having a candidate forum in your local Grange Hall. That's not politics, that's citizenship. And position it that way and invite them in. And I tell you what, Al, Betsy was at a local Grange meeting 3 or 4 weeks ago, and the ranking member of the House Ag Committee came to the meeting, G.T. Thompson. And so I think it's, I mean, it doesn't get better than that. Corporate America in Manhattan, New York would love to be able to have that kind of a network. So it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, we'll be having, we asked GT to join us at an event at National, and all we could get was a video. Pennsylvania State Grangers asked him to come to, I think, a number of events. He came to 2 separate events in a couple of weeks. So that shows where the priorities are, right? You know, they listen to us because, okay, yeah, the National Grange, they're important. They have things to say. That's all right. What they really want to hear from is you guys, what you have to say, because at the end of the day, you're the folks that they represent, not me and Burton for the most part. I guess Burton has a representative. I don't. I live in DC, so I don't even have a representative. But you know, in general, they care about you folks.
And I think that's also why we saw success with back in March with the DC experience of the number of our juniors and youth who were able to get meetings, if not with the representatives and senators directly, but with, I know some of them high-ranking members of their staff. Because it was a constituent coming directly into their office to be able to meet with them, because it's more effective for the constituents to come in directly than for us as representing the National Grange to come in. When somebody from the community is actually able to come in and speak for the issues directly affecting that community. I know I was with one person from Pennsylvania who went in and spoke eloquently about the issues directly affecting her workplace because of policies that were in place in Pennsylvania with her representative. And that was a really strong conversation. Actually, it was with GT's staff of all people. So that was really neat. At this point, are there any questions from anybody who's on about Grange policy in general, or, you know, anything? Guess not. It's a quiet crowd tonight. Well, the one thing that I want to show quickly to take a little bit of Burton and Sean's time, I'm going to have to unpin them, I think. Give me 1 second here. And it'll bring it back to me. Okay. The one thing that I want to show you really quickly, some people aren't aware that our policy book is directly available on our website. So I just want to kind of show you where to find it, because it's really not hard. So the National Grange website, of course, is full of resources for all of our members to use. And the greatest part about the policy book is that it's not password protected. It's not hidden behind any paywalls or anything, anything that you can't show our membership or people who aren't members. And it's right here under the member resources tab. The journal of proceedings from the past couple of years is available. This is this past year's, and about 2/3 of the way through is where our policy book starts. It takes a little bit to load because it is, 227 pages, as you see. But I'm going to do a quick scroll, and I should be in our policy already. There we are. So it's the policy both that was passed at this last year's national session, as well as we get down, the policy statements from those committees, as well as all of the policy that we have in place. You see here things like agriculture, trade policy, antitrust issues. And the other thing is that this is a searchable PDF. So if you're wondering if the Grange has a stance on something, I know Sean, we were talking just a little bit ago about solar power. I can jump directly to the one place that solar power is actually mentioned in our policy, which is great. So that way you can say, oh, there's not already standing policy on this. Let's get a committee together. Let's write a resolution and send this up, because this is something that should be on our books.
Yeah, to add to Phil's point, that's literally what I did when I saw the question in chat. So
I know you go there all the time.
I did exactly that to make sure. I have a general idea of what our policy is, but always worth double checking.
We have a lot in that book, so it's hard to keep track of, Okay, well, if there are no questions that are going to come in,
let me add one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
focus is still on rural America. It's been on rural America for the last 4 or 5 years. It's very much on rural America right now because we have upcoming midterm elections, and the Congress, both sides, Senate and House, are looking in many, many states at the rural vote being the swing vote. And so it's very important that rural America stand up and be heard. I don't care if you elect a Republican or a Democrat, as long as they represent you and your neighbors and your area of the state. And I just don't be bashful about being rural anymore. It's almost the end thing right now. And I just would encourage you to stand up for rural America, be a advocate for what you need in rural America, and invite folks to come see and learn about your area of rural and small town America. That I came to Washington quite a number of years ago, and you kind of had to hold your hat in your hand to represent rural and farming and ranching, and that's changing, folks. It may not be here forever, but it's changing right now. So take advantage of rural, and play your local issues and your politics well.
Great. Sean, any closing thoughts from you, since Burton just kind of gave us a little bit of his closing thoughts?
Well, like I said before, just get active in your communities, and don't forget about little old National Grange when you do so. Let us know and work with us and stay in touch.
Yeah, I'm going to drop all of our email address, or your email addresses, in the chat right now, just so that way everybody can see them, so that they know how to get a hold of you. Helps if I learn how to type. Hey, Burton, I do have a question for you, as Executive Director for Grange Advocacy, kind of about how advocacy partners with National Grange itself. Can you kind of give us a little quick explanation of that split?
Well, it's not really a split. It's a partnership. Several years ago, the Grange and a group of folks got together and formed the Grange Advocacy, a 501c4 organization that allows us to move very fast on issues. We don't have to go up and down for a lot of approval. We can, but let me be sure to say this first. The Grange, whatever Grange Advocacy does in the advocacy arena is Grange policy. I mean, we work within Grange policy. If it's against Grange policy or we don't have Grange policy, then we're probably not going to go there with Grange Advocacy. It is a board that is combined with Grange leadership and outside directors from various and sundry industries. And we partner on issues with other groups that have the same interest. And it's worked extremely well. We have some grants sometimes to offset the Grange expense to do that, which allows us to do more with Grange policy and not drain our coffers. The grants are a pretty important thing for Grange right now to be able to move their issues forward with some partners, particularly major issues. And we're back through Grange Advocacy. Grange is basically getting a lot more profile as the spokesman in rural America. Not that Grange couldn't get that profile before, but with the added partnerships we have with other groups, with some of the grants we have to work on those issues with them, over the last 2 or 3 years, Grange is becoming known as the rural spokesman in Washington on policy, and it's really been a great partnership between Grange Advocacy and the National Grange.
I see we did have a question come up here in chat about how to get a town hall, specifically for a sheriff. The thing I would do if I were trying to get a town hall from any sort of legislative person is, our elected official would be first, see if they have a scheduler. At the level of sheriff, they may be a 1-man or 2 or 3 or 4 person campaign, but see if they have a scheduler or something like that. and try to reach out to that person saying, basically, look, we're a community organization who is, nonpartisan. We're at the center of our community. Lots of folks who are engaged and interested in issues in our county. I think in this case, county or town or whatever level the sheriff is at, are ready to hear from you. We're a captive audience. A lot of times, elected officials are looking for every chance they can to talk to a captive audience of voters, generally, because they know that's their chance to make their pitch and get folks excited about them and ready to vote for them. So those would be the sort of things I would stress. And then if there's still nobody wants to come talk to you, don't be afraid to make a little bit of noise about it. We're the Grange. We're not, like I said, we're not political. We're not trying to tear anybody down. But don't be afraid to say, we've invited both candidates for county sheriff to come to a forum, and neither have decided, both have decided they don't want to speak to folks in the community. Maybe that'll get their attention a little bit. Of course, be tactful, be polite. This is the Grange. We're not, like I said, the some raucous political machine or something like that. But don't be afraid to make a little bit of noise if you're not getting any attention. And also, don't be afraid to partner with other organizations in your community to make it a bit larger event. So you could sort of say, look, not only do we have our local Grange, but maybe we have another 2 or 3 local Granges. Maybe we have a local, I don't know, Lions Club or Rotary Club or whatever that we're going to partner with. And we have the venue, and we'll supply the seating, and we'll do the advertising and everything for you. We just want you to show up and talk to your constituents. In my view, you'd be hard pressed to find many elected officials who would say no to that, to a nonpartisan audience of voters, which is what Grangers generally are. I'll tell you, when I worked in a congressional office before I was at the Grange, our member faced some very hostile town halls from folks back in the district. And he eventually decided to stop hosting town halls, and then they absolutely raked him over the coals for not hosting town halls, and he eventually lost election. Now, I'm not saying we go scorched earth in the Grange over some sheriff election and say to the papers that this sheriff's not willing to face the people or something like that. But it's okay to, say we've invited these people and we'd like to see them come in a public, polite way. I don't know, just a couple of tips. Remember, we're the Grange, but a couple of ways you can maybe try to get their attention is working with other groups and making some noise about it publicly. I'll let Betsy advise you if you're going too far.
If it's a sitting member of Congress, the representative will have local offices in his district from 2 to 3 or 4. The senator will have the same number of state offices around the state. And if it's a sitting member of Congress, you'd like to get into your town hall or come to visit the Grange, Sean and I can give you a very important group of people, and that is those local district directors. What we find is that we can take people into the offices in Washington, and that's we'll be listened to, and folks will probably be glad we came. But if it's a real tough issue or an urgent issue, go to that state director's office down the road and tell him about it and how important it is, what it means to you, and why they should pay particular attention to it. And his phone call to the boss will make a whole lot more difference than us going in and talking to them from afar. So, Paul, I was years ago when I was a young guy, I got to know and be around Tip O'Neill a lot. It was the old Speaker of the House from Massachusetts. He coined the phrase, "All politics is local, boys." And you get into a tough situation, and he would say, "Don't forget, all politics is local." And so that state director, the guy in that district office, knows a lot about that county, that town, that community. And if you really, really need to get a message to the boss, that's a good way to do it also. And we can give you that contact whenever you need it.
Yeah, for federal level officials and probably your state level officials as well, depending on the state, they'll have a staff who you'd want to reach out to first for things like this. You probably want to reach out well in advance. For a sheriff, I'm not sure. Their campaign may be themselves and their, spouse and whoever else, friends, running a Facebook page, not a, formal operation per se, but easier to reach directly maybe then. But you probably know the situation better than I do. I don't know. Some sheriffs have big jurisdictions, some don't. So some might have staff.
And the other thing that I say always goes hands in hand with politics is food. So make sure you let them know that you're going to feed them in the process. And that's how we get GT at our functions, because we make sure that, you know, we feed them at those nights. Okay, any last questions before we wrap up here? We're at about our hour mark. I don't see anybody jumping in. Okay, so thank you all for being on tonight. Sean, Burton, I really appreciate your time and everything that you're doing for us at the Grange, at the national level, in DC, all the help that you're giving the local level too. So thank you for your time. And I will see you guys at the fly-in on Sunday. And I really, again, encourage everybody to tune in, register for that virtual fly-in. On Monday, we've got a great slate of speakers. They're listed in the upcoming patrons chain that'll be out on Friday. So make sure you pay attention in there. So good luck, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Phil.
coming.